Why did you come by taxi? My grandmother asked, her sharp gaze cutting through the crowded ballroom. Where is the $90,000 Audi I bought you? Before I could even open my mouth to explain that my vehicle had mysteriously vanished from my driveway that morning, my father Julian smiled while swirling his expensive bourbon. She does not own it anymore. Her younger sister does. My grandmother froze. The clinking of crystal glasses around us seemed to stop entirely as the music faded into the background. She slowly turned toward her attorney standing nearby and narrowed her eyes. Who authorized that title transfer? My name is Naomi, and I am 32 years old. I always knew my family viewed me as completely invisible, but I never expected them to steal a luxury vehicle right out of my driveway and brag about it at a high society gala. If you have ever had your hard work stolen by the exact people who are supposed to protect you, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe because you will definitely want to hear how I turned their smug little theft into an absolute nightmare. I work as a user experience and user interface tech consultant. It is a highly demanding field that requires razor-sharp logic, long hours, and an absolute mastery of digital systems. My family never understood what I did, nor did they care. Growing up in our affluent household in Atlanta, I was always the scapegoat. I was the quiet workhorse expected to fend for herself, while my 28-year-old sister Simone was treated as the ultimate golden child. While I worked double shifts at a campus coffee shop to pay my own college tuition, Simone was handed the world on a silver platter. My parents, Julian and Valerie, funded her lavish lifestyle, gave her unlimited credit cards, and praised her every mediocre accomplishment. I was just the background character in the movie of her perfect life. But my grandmother Vivienne was entirely different. She is a self-made billionaire who built a massive real estate and cosmetics empire from the dirt up during the 1970s. She despises weakness and has absolutely zero tolerance for financial parasitism. She noticed my silent daily grind. When I landed my first major tech consulting contract, she quietly rewarded me with a brand new Audi e-tron. It was the only truly luxurious thing I owned, and it was a profound symbol of her respect for my independence. My parents were furious that I received such an expensive gift, while Simone received nothing, but grandmother Vivienne made it clear that the car was a reward for hard work, not a handout. Tonight was grandmother Vivienne's 78th birthday gala hosted at her sprawling estate in Buckhead. The driveway was lined with luxury cars and valet attendants rushing back and forth. Inside, a live jazz band played softly while the elite of the city mingled in designer gowns and tailored suits. I had arrived in a standard ride-share, feeling deeply unsettled by the disappearance of my car earlier that morning. When I walked into the grand dining room to greet my grandmother, my parents and my sister were already hovering around her, desperate to monopolize her attention. That was when the confrontation happened. After my father smugly announced that Simone now owned my car, the temperature in the room plummeted. Grandmother Vivienne demanded to know who authorized the transfer. My brother-in-law, DeAndre, stepped forward smoothly. He is 30 years old, a finance manager at a luxury car dealership, and the kind of man who uses his slick charm to mask his deep greed. Now, Grandma Vivienne, let us be reasonable, DeAndre said, flashing a bright, patronizing smile. Naomi works from home. She sits in her pajamas all day coding and looking at computer screens. She does not need a high-performance luxury vehicle just to go to the grocery store. Simone, on the other hand, is a rising star in luxury real estate. She needs to maintain a certain image for her wealthy clients. Showing up in an Audi e-tron helps her close million-dollar deals. We just moved the family assets around to where they are most useful. My mother Valerie immediately chimed in, rushing to defend her golden child and her favorite son-in-law. DeAndre is exactly right, she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively at me. Naomi was being entirely selfish, hoarding that beautiful car in her garage when she barely even drives it. Family shares with family. You are always trying to make a big deal out of nothing, Naomi. You should be happy to support your sister's real estate career instead of being so greedy. My father, Julian, nodded in agreement, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. Exactly, Valerie, he said, looking at me with pure disdain. Simone is building a brand. Naomi just types on a keyboard. We made an executive family decision to allocate resources properly. You should be thanking DeAndre for handling the paperwork so efficiently. It saved us a lot of bureaucratic hassle. I stood there in my simple black dress surrounded by my own family, treating Grand Theft Auto like a minor household chore. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not throw a tantrum the way Simone would have done if someone had taken so much as a pair of her designer shoes. Years of being pushed aside had taught me to process betrayal with cold, calculated logic. I looked directly at DeAndre, whose smug expression was practically begging to be wiped off his face. I never signed a single piece of paper, I said, my voice deliberately calm and echoing clearly in the sudden quiet of the room. I never authorized a title transfer. I never gave you permission to take my property. DeAndre chuckled, adjusting his tie as if I were a foolish child throwing a tantrum. The paperwork is already filed with the state, Naomi. It is fully registered under Simone's name now. You can complain all you want, but the car is legally hers. You just need to let it go and stop embarrassing us in front of Grandma's guests. He thought he had won. I thought his managerial position at the dealership gave him ultimate power over the vehicle's documentation. He thought I was just a powerless, invisible nerd who would swallow the massive injustice just to keep the peace. He had entirely underestimated what a top-tier tech consultant actually does. Attorney Sterling, who had been standing silently beside my grandmother, narrowed his eyes. If Naomi did not sign the title transfer, DeAndre, then you have just admitted to committing felony forgery and grand theft. He stated, his voice carrying the heavy weight of legal authority. The wailing of the car alarm outside served as a chaotic soundtrack to the absolute silence that had fallen over my grandmother's dining room. The smooth jazz music abruptly cut off. The elite guests of Buckhead High Society stood completely frozen, holding their crystal champagne flutes mid-air. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd as eyes darted between Simone pressing her hands against the glass windows and me standing calmly in the center of the room. Attorney Sterling did not say a word at first. He simply reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced a sleek black tablet. As the primary legal counsel for my grandmother's massive real estate and cosmetics empire, Sterling had immediate access to state and federal databases. The glowing screen reflected against his gold-rimmed glasses as his fingers flew across the digital keyboard. The tension in the room grew so thick it felt suffocating. My father shifted his weight uncomfortably, shooting nervous glances at DeAndre. DeAndre had lost all his slick charm. He was sweating visibly, pulling at the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He took a step toward Sterling, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Now listen, Sterling, there is no need to make this a legal matter. DeAndre stammered, his voice lacking its usual smooth confidence. It was a simple internal dealership transaction, a family favor. I expedited the paperwork to help Simone out with her real estate image, that is all. Sterling ignored him completely. His eyes remained locked on the tablet screen, tracking the digital paper trail. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, but it carried the chilling weight of a judge reading a guilty verdict. This is not a simple family favor, DeAndre, Sterling said. This is a textbook case of title washing and fraudulent transfer. My grandmother. Vivienne remained seated at the head of the table, her spine perfectly straight, her expression unreadable. Explain it to me, Sterling, she commanded. Sterling turned the tablet toward my grandmother. According to the Georgia Department of Motor Vehicles database, the title for the Audi e-tron was officially transferred yesterday afternoon. The dealership where DeAndre serves as finance manager processed a duplicate title request, claiming the original was lost. The paperwork features a signature that is supposed to be Naomi's. However, the signature was digitally stamped using DeAndre's managerial credentials at the dealership, bypassing the standard verification process. I looked at DeAndre, my expression devoid of any sympathy. You used your corporate access to forge my digital signature, I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to the surrounding guests. You bypassed the notary requirement and abused your dealership's priority processing system to wash the title clean. You literally stole my vehicle from my driveway while I was working and transferred the ownership to your wife. Simone rushed back from the window, her designer dress swishing furiously. She pointed an accusing finger at me, her face twisted in anger. You are lying, she shrieked. You gave it to me. You said you did not need it because you are a socially awkward hermit who never leaves the house. Why do you always have to ruin everything for me, Naomi? Why are you so jealous of my success? The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. But before I could respond, my mother Valerie inserted herself between me and Simone. Valerie was a master of manipulation, a woman who prioritized social standing and her golden child over absolute truth. She grabbed her pearl necklace, her chest heaving as she began her theatrical performance for the wealthy onlookers. Naomi, how could you do this to your own sister? Valerie screamed, her voice echoing off the marble pillars. It is just a car. Family shares with family. You are trying to ruin your sister's life over a piece of metal. You have always been so incredibly selfish. Simone needs that vehicle to show her high-end real estate clients that she is successful. You work in your pajamas all day. You do not need to project an image of luxury. We are a family and we support each other. You should be lifting your sister up instead of trying to destroy her marriage and her career just because you are bitter and alone. The gaslighting was intense and meticulously calculated. My mother was deliberately framing me as the jealous villain and Simone as the innocent victim. She wanted the elite crowd to view my demand for justice as a petty sibling rivalry rather than a call to address a serious federal crime. Valerie stepped closer to me, her eyes flashing with venom. You are embarrassing us in front of the mayor, in front of the city council members, in front of everyone who matters in Atlanta. Valerie hissed, keeping her voice just low enough that only the immediate circle could hear the pure hatred in her tone. Call off that ridiculous alarm right now. Tell Attorney Sterling it was a misunderstanding and sign the actual paperwork tomorrow morning. If you do not fix this mess right now, you will destroy DeAndre's career. He could lose his dealership license. Do you really want your future niece or nephew to grow up with a father who has a criminal record? I stared at my mother, marveling at her ability to completely ignore the fact that her son-in-law had committed grand larceny. She did not care that I had been robbed. She only cared that the theft had been exposed in public. I slowly turned my gaze from my mother to Simone and finally to DeAndre. I will not unlock the vehicle, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm register. That car is equipped with military-grade biometric security that I coded myself. It requires my unique thumbprint, my retinal scan, and a secondary encrypted passcode that changes every 30 seconds. You cannot hotwire it. You cannot bypass the mainframe. The engine is bricked. The transmission is permanently locked in park. The steering column is paralyzed. My father, Julian, slammed his fist onto the dining table, rattling the expensive silverware. You will unlock that car right this second, Naomi, he bellowed, his face turning an angry shade of purple. You are acting like a spoiled child. I am your father and I am telling you to turn off that alarm and give your sister the keys. If you attempt to call a tow truck to drag it away, I will immediately call the Atlanta Police Department and report the vehicle as stolen. I continued, completely ignoring my father's outburst. I will provide the police with the vehicle identification number, my original purchase documentation, and the security logs from my phone showing the unauthorized movement of the car from my property this morning. DeAndre will be arrested for grand theft auto and felony forgery before the appetizers are even cleared from this room. Julian took a threatening step toward me, his large frame casting a shadow over me. You ungrateful little brat, he growled. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. We clothed you. We fed you. And this is how you repay us. By threatening to send your own brother-in-law to prison over a car you do not even use. If you make that phone call to the police, you are dead to me. Do you hear me, Naomi? I will completely disown you. You will be cut off from this family forever. You will never set foot in our house again. I looked at the man who had ignored my existence for my entire life, unless he needed someone to blame for his own failures. Disown me, I asked, tilting my head slightly. You cannot disown someone you never claimed in the first place, Julian. I paid my own way through college. I paid my own rent. I built my tech consulting career entirely on my own, while you poured all your resources into Simone. The only thing you are threatening to take away from me is the burden of dealing with your constant disrespect. That is not a punishment. That is a liberation. The crowd around us murmured in shock. In the high society of Buckhead, Atlanta, airing dirty laundry with such brutal honesty was considered the ultimate social taboo. People were whispering behind their hands, their eyes wide with scandalous delight. The perfect facade my parents had spent decades cultivating was shattering into a million pieces right on my grandmother's imported Persian rugs. Valerie burst into loud, dramatic sobs, burying her face in her hands. "She is unstable," Valerie cried out to the surrounding guests, playing the role of the heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. "We have tried so hard to help her, but her mental health has always been a struggle. Please forgive this terrible scene." DeAndre tried to capitalize on the distraction. He lunged toward me, reaching for my evening bag. "Just give me the phone, Naomi," he demanded, his eyes wild with panic. "I can override the alarm from the app. Give it to me now." Before his hand could even brush the fabric of my bag, a sharp, deafening crack echoed through the massive dining room. Grandmother Vivian had stood up. She raised her solid mahogany cane and slammed it violently against the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot, instantly freezing DeAndre in his tracks and silencing my mother's fake sobbing. The entire ballroom held its breath. Vivian was not a tall woman, but she possessed an aura of absolute terrifying authority. She had survived the brutal business world of the Deep South, built an empire when society told her she was nothing, and crushed anyone who tried to cheat her. Her eyes burning with a fierce cold light swept over Julian, Valerie, Simone, and DeAndre. The look of pure disgust on her face made my father physically recoil. "Not another word," Vivian commanded, her voice dangerously quiet, but carrying the force of a hurricane. "Not a single sound from any of you parasitic fools." She turned her piercing gaze to me and then to her lawyer. Her expression shifted from rage to cold, calculating business. The birthday celebration was officially over. The time for pleasantries had passed. It was time to deal with the rot that had infected her family tree. Naomi Sterling Vivienne ordered, adjusting her silk shawl around her shoulders. "Follow me to my study. Right now, we have business to conduct." The heavy oak doors of Grandmother Vivienne's private study clicked shut, sealing us inside a soundproof fortress. The blaring siren of my stolen Audi and the chaotic murmurs of the elite guests were instantly severed, leaving only the heavy silence of the room. This space was Vivian's true domain. The walls were lined with dark mahogany bookshelves, showcasing decades of real estate acquisitions, cosmetic patents, and legal victories. There were no family portraits here, only the trophies of a woman who had conquered a world designed to crush her. Grandmother Vivian did not sit behind her massive desk. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the flashing red hazard lights still illuminating the driveway. The polite societal mask she wore for the Buckhead elite melted away entirely. Her posture shifted, transforming her back into the ruthless titan who had clawed her way out of poverty in the 1970s. As a black woman, building an empire during an era when banks would not even look at her without a white male co-signer, Vivian had survived by being smarter, faster, and infinitely more vicious than her competitors. She despised weakness, but more than anything, she loathed financial parasitism. "I always knew your parents were leeches, Naomi," she said without turning around. Her voice was stripped of any grandmotherly warmth, leaving only the cold steel of a corporate shark. "I allowed Julian and Valerie to play their little socialite games. I allowed them to swipe the crumbs from my table to maintain their pathetic facade of wealth. I thought if I threw them enough scraps, they would eventually leave you alone and let you build your own life in peace." She turned to face me, her dark eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity. "But Grand Theft Auto, stealing a $90,000 vehicle right out of your driveway and having the sheer audacity to parade that crime in my house, that is not just greed, that is an insult to my intelligence, and I do not tolerate insults." Attorney Sterling stepped forward, placing his briefcase on one of the leather visitor chairs. He adjusted his glasses, looking at Vivian with absolute professional synchronicity. "Are we proceeding with the contingency plan, Vivian?" he asked quietly. "We are executing the scorched earth protocol, Sterling," she replied, moving toward a large oil painting on the far wall. She pressed a hidden mechanism behind the heavy gold frame, swinging the artwork aside to reveal a massive biometric steel vault. She pressed her thumb against the scanner. A heavy mechanical clunk echoed through the room as the vault door unsealed. The Audi was just the tip of the iceberg, Naomi, she said, pulling a thick manila dossier from the safe. She walked over to the desk and threw the heavy file down with a resounding slap. It landed right in front of me. The tab read, Julian and Valerie Family Trust Disbursements. I stared at the file, feeling a sudden chill. What is this? I asked, stepping closer to the desk. Open it, Vivian commanded. I flipped the cover back. The first page was a copy of a massive wire transfer request. The amount made my breath catch in my throat. $500,000. The recipient account belonged to a luxury real estate development firm in the suburbs. I looked up, my mind racing. $500,000. What did they buy? Sterling answered, handing me a secondary document from the file. A McMansion in Alpharetta. A 6-bedroom estate with a pool, a home theater, and a massive garage. The deed is registered under the names Simone and DeAndre. My hands actually shook as I held the paper. My sister and her husband did not have the income to qualify for a loan on a house that expensive. DeAndre worked at a car dealership, and Simone sold maybe 3 modest properties a year. They lived beyond their means, entirely funded by my parents. But my parents did not have $500,000 in liquid cash just sitting around. They lived on the generous allowance Vivian provided them. Look at the guarantor signature line, Naomi, Vivian said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the bottom of the wire transfer authorization. I scanned down the page. There on the line requiring the primary trust holder's authorization was a signature. It read, Vivian C. Sterling. But I had spent enough time around my grandmother analyzing her documents to know her handwriting. The loops were wrong. The pressure was uneven. This is a forgery, I whispered, horrified by the sheer scale of the deception. They forged your signature. Vivienne nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. They colluded with DeAndre to siphon $500,000 directly out of my secondary family trust. DeAndre used his connections in the finance sector to bypass the standard banking verifications. Julian and Valerie signed the paperwork guaranteeing the funds against my primary estate. They bought their golden child a McMansion using my money, and they thought I was too old and senile to notice a missing $500,000. The betrayal was staggering. While I had been working 80-hour weeks debugging software and building a consulting firm to ensure I never had to rely on anyone, my parents were committing federal wire fraud to buy a mansion for the daughter who did absolutely nothing. They were not just playing favorites. They were engaging in organized crime to fund Simone's fake lifestyle of black excellence. I found out about the fraudulent transfer 2 weeks ago. Vivian continued pacing behind her desk. Sterling and I have been quietly investigating the exact mechanisms DeAndre used to bypass the bank security. We were building an airtight case. But tonight, stealing your car using the exact same fraudulent methods they used to steal my money. That proved they are entirely out of control. They believe they are untouchable. They believe they can take whatever they want from whoever they want because they carry my last name. I looked at my grandmother, understanding the magnitude of the storm that was about to break. If you hand this file over to the authorities, they will all go to prison, I said, stating the clinical reality of the situation. DeAndre, my father, my mother. Simone might be implicated as an accessory. Sterling cleared his throat, stepping beside me. That is precisely why your grandmother brought you into this room, Naomi. Filing a police report is the standard procedure. But Vivian does not want standard procedure. Standard procedure means years of legal battles, messy public trials, and defense attorneys trying to negotiate plea deals. Vivian stopped pacing and leaned heavily on her desk, locking her fierce eyes with mine. Prison is too easy, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Prison gives them a chance to play the victim. I want them ruined. I want them stripped of every single asset, every shred of false dignity, and every penny they think they are entitled to. I want them to feel the exact desperation you felt when they threw you out into the cold. And I need a ruthless architect to design their destruction. I need you. Me, I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sterling opened his briefcase again. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He laid them out on the desk next to the dossier of forged wires. Vivienne picked up a heavy gold fountain pen. I am 78 years old, Naomi. I built this empire with blood, sweat, and tears. I will be damned if I let Julian and Valerie dismantle it to buy designer purses and luxury cars for a girl who cannot even spell the word integrity. But my health is not what it used to be. The stress of managing a $40 million portfolio while fighting my own blood in court is a vulnerability they will try to exploit. They will try to claim I am medically unfit. They will try to seize conservatorship. She looked down at the documents. Therefore, I am executing a permanent emergency power of attorney. I am transferring absolute executive control of my entire $40 million estate, my corporate holdings, my trusts, and all my liquid assets directly to you, effective immediately. I stared at the gold fountain pen in her hand, completely stunned by the monumental weight of her words. $40 million, total executive control. She was handing me the keys to the entire kingdom. She was granting me the absolute power to dictate the financial survival of the very people who had spent my entire life trying to erase my existence. You trust me with this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. After everything they have done, and how can you be sure I will not take the money and disappear? Because you are the only one in this family who actually understands the value of a dollar, Vivian replied without hesitation. You earned your own success. You never asked me for a dime. When I gave you that Audi, you drove it to client meetings to secure your own wealth. You did not use it to pose for social media pictures. You have my mind, Naomi. You have my ruthlessness. And right now I need you to wield it like a sword. Sterling slid a signature indicator across the first page of the legal packet. If you accept this, Naomi, you become the sole legal proxy for Vivian Sterling. He explained, his tone completely devoid of emotion. You will have the authority to freeze accounts, dissolve trusts, acquire properties, and liquidate assets. Julian and Valerie currently rely on a monthly stipend from a subsidiary trust. You will have the power to sever that lifeline. DeAndre and Simone live in a house bought with stolen funds. You will have the power to foreclose on it. You will become their financial judge, jury, and executioner. I looked at the documents. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, and the sheer arrogance of my father standing in the dining room, demanding I hand over my keys to the sister who stole my car. I thought about my mother trying to silence my trauma to protect her country club reputation. Vivian pressed the gold pen into my hand. Her skin was cool, but her grip was like iron, transferring decades of resilience directly into my veins. I do not want you to just report them to the police. Naomi, Vivian commanded, her eyes burning with a dark, unyielding fire. I want you to dismantle their lives piece by piece, buy their debts, freeze their accounts, trap them in a financial web they can never escape, crush them, granddaughter, leave them absolutely nothing. I took a deep breath, letting the cold logic of the situation wash over me. I uncapped the gold pen, pressing the nib against the heavy paper. Consider it done, I said, and I signed my name. 3 days passed in a blur of strategic silence. I did not return my mother's frantic phone calls. I ignored my father's increasingly demanding text messages. Instead, I spent 72 hours locked in Attorney Sterling's downtown office, mapping out the total financial annihilation of my own bloodline. The power Vivian had legally handed me was intoxicating, but I knew I had to wield it with absolute precision. Then came the summons. A calendar invite hit my inbox for an 8 o'clock dinner at Chop's Lobster Bar, one of the most exclusive and expensive steakhouses in Buckhead. The note attached was from my mother. It read, "Please, Naomi, we need to talk as a family. Let us make things right." I knew exactly what this was. It was not an olive branch. It was a desperation tactic. I dressed in a sharp-tailored crimson blazer and black trousers, projecting the image of a woman who was absolutely untouchable. Before stepping out of my car, I tapped the screen of my smartwatch, opening a highly sensitive audio recording application I had developed for corporate meetings. I set it to run silently in the background, capturing every whisper. When I walked into the dimly lit mahogany-paneled dining room, I spotted them immediately. They were seated in a plush circular booth tucked away in the back corner. My father, Julian, wore his signature designer suit, but his usual arrogant posture was gone. He looked rigid, his shoulders hunched. My mother, Valerie, forced a brilliant artificial smile the moment she saw me approaching. Simone sat next to her husband, DeAndre. DeAndre looked physically ill. His skin was ashen and he kept wiping his palms on a high-end linen napkin. Naomi's sweetheart Valerie cooed, standing up to try and pull me into a hug. I sidestepped her, completely sliding into the booth on the opposite side of the table. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "Let us skip the performance, Mother," I said, my voice flat. "You did not invite me to a five-star restaurant because you suddenly discovered your maternal instincts. Why am I here?" Julian cleared his throat, signaling the waiter to pour him another glass of expensive red wine. He took a heavy gulp before fixing me with a stern but cautious look. "We want to put that unfortunate incident at the birthday party behind us, Naomi." Tensions were high. People said things they regret. We are family and family forgives. I looked at DeAndre. He could not even make eye contact with me. He stared down at his empty plate, trembling slightly. "Is this about forgiveness?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or is this about the federal investigators currently auditing DeAndre's luxury dealership?" DeAndre choked on his breath. Simone grabbed his arm, shooting me a venomous glare. "How did you know about the audit?" Simone demanded. I smiled thinly. "I am a tech consultant, Simone. I have friends in cybersecurity who monitor corporate network activity. When a federal agency subpoenas a luxury auto dealer's digital transaction logs, word gets around. I assume they found the forged biometric signature stamp DeAndre used to bypass the Department of Motor Vehicles system." Valerie leaned across the table, her eyes wide with a manufactured sense of panic. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled it away. "Naomi, you have to help us." Valerie pleaded, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "The dealership's compliance officers flagged the title transfer. The federal auditors are threatening to bring the FBI into this because the electronic signature was processed across state servers. That makes it wire fraud. DeAndre could lose his finance license. He could go to federal prison." I leaned back against the leather booth. "And why is that my problem? He stole my car." Julian slammed his hand quietly against the table, trying to maintain his intimidating patriarch persona without drawing the attention of the other wealthy diners. "Because it does not have to be a crime," he hissed. "We had a lawyer look at it. If you sign a backdated bill of sale stating you sold the Audi to Simone for $1, we can present it to the auditors tomorrow morning. We can claim it was a documented family gift, and the digital processing was just an administrative shortcut. The federal agents will drop the investigation and go away." They slid a crisp manila folder across the table. Inside was a legally binding bill of sale meticulously drafted to absolve DeAndre of all criminal liability. It just needed my signature. They wanted me to clean up their felony. I looked at the document and then looked at them. "You want me to legally perjure myself and lie to federal investigators to save the man who robbed me?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level to ensure my smartwatch captured every syllable clearly. Simone suddenly burst into loud theatrical tears. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing loudly enough for the neighboring tables to glance over. "You have to sign it, Naomi," Simone cried, her voice shaking with desperate emotion. "You cannot let them take DeAndre away from me. Not now. Not when I am pregnant." The table went entirely still. Valerie gasped, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "Oh, my sweet baby girl," Valerie cried, wrapping her arms around Simone. Julian looked at DeAndre with sudden shock and then glared fiercely at me. "You hear that, Naomi?" Julian demanded, his voice thick with righteous anger. "Your sister is carrying a child, my grandchild. Are you really going to let your future niece or nephew be born while their father is sitting in a federal penitentiary? Are you really that heartless and cruel? Do you want to destroy a growing family over your petty jealousy?" I stared at Simone. The pregnancy manipulation was a classic narcissistic tactic. I highly doubted she was actually pregnant, but even if she was using an unborn child as a human shield to escape federal prosecution was a new low even for her. I needed to execute my counterstrike flawlessly. I needed them to explicitly confess to the mechanics of the crime on tape, so there would be zero ambiguity when I handed the audio over to the authorities. I softened my expression, pretending to look conflicted and overwhelmed by the news of a baby. I took a deep breath, looking down at the bill of sale. "A baby," I murmured, playing the part of the guilt-ridden sister. "I did not know." "We just found out," DeAndre lied quickly, his voice shaking with desperation. "Please, Naomi, I was just trying to help my wife look successful." I made a terrible mistake. I will pay you back for the car. I promise. Just sign the paper. I picked up the pen they had provided, twirling it between my fingers. I looked at my mother and father, projecting a facade of confusion and hesitation. But I do not understand how we can convince the federal agents, I said, keeping my tone soft and naive. The auditors are smart. If I sign this bill of sale today, how do we explain the digital bypass DeAndre did 3 days ago? How did you even process a secure title transfer without my physical presence at the dealership, DeAndre? The auditors will ask me that, and I need to know what to say. DeAndre, eager to secure my signature and thinking I was actually going to help him, fell right into the trap. He leaned forward, whispering the exact details of his felony. It is easy, Naomi. As the finance manager, I have admin override access to the state database. Julian brought me a copy of your old lease agreement from his personal files, which had your wet signature on it. I scanned it into the system and used a digital overlay software to stamp it onto the new title transfer documents. I bypassed the biometric notary requirement by flagging the transaction as an internal corporate fleet transfer. I nodded slowly, processing his confession. So, Julian, you supplied my private signature from your personal files to help DeAndre commit the fraud, I asked, looking directly at my father. Julian scoffed, rolling his eyes impatiently. I gave him the file, yes. It was for the good of the family, Naomi. Simone needed the car to impress the developers for her new real estate listings. We did what we had to do. You were not using the vehicle properly anyway. You just leave it parked while you type on your computer. And Valerie, I turned to my mother. Did you know they were using my old lease documents to forge a state title transfer? Of course I knew, Valerie snapped, losing her sweet facade entirely. I am the one who found the file in the home office. I handed it to Julian. We all agreed it was the best solution. We are a team, Naomi. We protect each other. Now stop asking stupid questions and sign the document before the feds raid the dealership tomorrow and ruin our reputation. My smartwatch buzzed slightly against my wrist, confirming the audio file had automatically backed up to my secure cloud server. I had them. DeAndre confessed to wire fraud, identity theft, and misusing corporate credentials. Julian confessed to providing the fraudulent materials. Valerie confessed to conspiring and aiding the theft. They had just gift-wrapped 3 federal indictments and handed them to me on a silver platter. I placed the pen down on the table. The sharp click of the metal against the polished wood sounded like a gavel striking a sound block. The illusion of my hesitation vanished, instantly replaced by absolute freezing clarity. I looked at Simone, whose fake tears had miraculously stopped as she waited for me to sign. Congratulations on the imaginary baby, Simone, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. I am sure making up a pregnancy was a great strategic choice in your mind. But unfortunately for you, federal judges do not grant leniency for fictional children. Simone dropped her jaw. What are you talking about? She stammered. I pushed the manila folder and the backdated bill of sale back across the table toward DeAndre. I am not signing anything, I stated clearly. I do not commit federal perjury for thieves, and I certainly do not save the people who tried to bury me. Valerie slammed her hands on the table, causing the wine glasses to rattle. You selfish, ungrateful witch, she hissed, her face contorted with rage. If you do not sign that paper, DeAndre goes to prison. You are destroying our family. I stood up, smoothing the front of my crimson blazer. You destroyed yourselves, Valerie, I replied. You just confessed to conspiracy, identity theft, and federal wire fraud, all of which I have meticulously recorded on a secure audio device that is currently syncing directly to my attorney's secure server. The color completely drained from Julian's face. He stared at my smartwatch, his eyes wide with sheer terror. You recorded us, he whispered, his voice cracking. Every single word, Julian, I confirmed, grabbing my evening bag. I needed you to explicitly detail exactly how you stole my property, so the federal auditors do not have to waste their time guessing. I will be sending this audio file to the lead investigator at the Department of Motor Vehicles and the FBI Cybercrimes Division first thing tomorrow morning. DeAndre looked like he was about to vomit. He grabbed his chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack set in. Simone grabbed him, shaking him, but he was completely unresponsive, staring blankly at the wall. You cannot do this to us, Julian shouted, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at me. I am your father. And I am the woman who just ended your life as you know it, I replied. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and dropped it onto the center of the table right on top of their fraudulent contract. "This is for my glass of water," I said, turning my back on them. "I highly suggest you enjoy your expensive steaks tonight. The food in federal prison is notoriously terrible." I walked out of Chop's Lobster Bar, leaving my toxic family hyperventilating in the corner booth. The cool Atlanta night air hit my face and I took a deep, cleansing breath. The game had officially begun, and I was already 3 moves ahead. By 7 o'clock the next morning, I was walking into the sleek, ultra-modern lobby of Luminate Tech Partners. Our firm occupied the top 3 floors of a towering glass skyscraper in Midtown Atlanta. We catered exclusively to Fortune 500 companies optimizing their digital infrastructure and user interfaces. I was their top billing consultant. My reputation was immaculate. I had spent years building a bulletproof professional shield specifically, so my toxic family could never touch me here. But toxic people do not respect boundaries. They view boundaries as a personal challenge. I stepped off the private elevator onto the executive floor, holding my usual iced matcha latte. The receptionist usually greeted me with a bright smile, but today she looked down at her desk, avoiding my eyes. The hallway was strangely quiet. As I reached the frosted glass door of my corner office, I found Marcus, our head of human resources, waiting for me. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest and his expression was grim. "Naomi," Marcus said, his voice stripped of its usual morning warmth, "do not take your coat off. Evelyn wants to see you in the main boardroom right now." Evelyn Sterling was the founding partner of Luminate. She was a brilliant, formidable black woman who commanded respect the moment she entered a room. She did not call emergency morning meetings unless a multi-million-dollar account was on the line or a corporate scandal was brewing. I followed Marcus down the corridor, my mind racing through my current client accounts. Everything was perfectly optimized. There were no missed deliverables. When Marcus opened the heavy double doors to the executive boardroom, I stepped inside and immediately understood the source of the crisis. Sitting at the far end of the massive mahogany conference table, sobbing dramatically into a crumpled tissue, was my sister Simone. She was wearing an oversized beige cardigan, strategically clutching her stomach to emphasize her fabricated pregnancy. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked like the ultimate tragic victim. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her hands steepled together, her sharp gaze fixed on me as I entered. The tension in the room was absolute. It felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked through the ventilation system. "Sit down, Naomi," Evelyn commanded, her voice sharp and clinical. I pulled out a leather chair opposite Simone and sat, placing my briefcase carefully on the polished wood. I did not show an ounce of surprise or fear. I kept my face entirely neutral. "Your sister showed up at our lobby at 6:30 this morning." Evelyn began, gesturing towards Simone. "She bypassed security by claiming it was a family emergency. She has spent the last hour telling human resources a very disturbing story about your activities outside of this firm." Simone let out a loud, ragged sob, pressing the tissue to her eyes. "I am so sorry to do this," Naomi, Simone cried, forcing her voice to tremble. "But I could not stay silent anymore. You are destroying our family. You are stealing from Grandma Vivienne to fund your lifestyle, and now you are trying to frame my husband for fraud to cover your tracks." Marcus leaned forward, looking at me with deep concern. "Naomi, your sister claims you have been engaging in elder financial abuse. She alleges that you manipulated your grandmother into signing over her estate, and that the luxury vehicles and designer clothes you own are purchased with embezzled funds. She also claims you threatened to have her husband arrested using fabricated evidence because you are jealous of her pregnancy." I stared at Simone, marveling at the sheer audacity of her lies. She had realized that my audio recording at the steakhouse was going to destroy DeAndre, so she decided to strike first. She was trying to deploy the ultimate corporate backstab. She wanted to frame me as a criminal fraudster, knowing that a prestigious tech consulting firm like Luminate relies entirely on the immaculate ethical reputation of its consultants. If Evelyn believed even a fraction of this story, I would be terminated immediately. My career would be completely radioactive. "Naomi, we manage highly sensitive data for global corporations," Evelyn said, her dark eyes narrowing. "Integrity is the foundation of our business. If an employee is engaged in financial crimes or elder abuse, that is an immediate termination offense. We cannot afford that kind of liability. I need you to explain this right now." Simone sniffled, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. Please, Evelyn, you have to fire her before she steals from your clients, too. She is a sociopath. She hates me because I have a husband and a baby on the way, and she is completely alone. She is trying to ruin my life. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice or act defensive. I simply looked at Marcus, then at Evelyn, and finally at my sister. Are you finished, Simone? I asked, my voice as calm and smooth as glass. Have you completed your performance? Simone glared at me, her victim mask slipping for just a fraction of a second to reveal the venomous hatred underneath. I am just telling the truth, she snapped. I unlatched the gold clasps of my leather briefcase. I reached inside and pulled out a thick bound folder. I slid it deliberately across the polished mahogany table toward Evelyn. Evelyn, I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I apologize that my biological relatives have brought their circus to your boardroom. What you are looking at is a person desperately attempting to execute a preemptive smear campaign because her husband is currently the target of a federal investigation. Evelyn frowned, opening the folder. Marcus leaned over to look. The first document in that file is a copy of an active police report and a federal inquiry number, I explained, detailing exactly what they were reading. My brother-in-law, DeAndre, fraudulently transferred the title of my personal vehicle using his managerial credentials at a luxury dealership. The state auditors flagged the digital forgery 3 days ago. The second document is a sworn statement from Attorney Sterling, who happens to be the primary legal counsel for my grandmother Vivian, confirming that my sister and her husband are currently occupying a home purchased with $500,000 of stolen trust funds. Simone shot out of her chair, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She is lying, Simone screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Do not look at those papers. She fabricated them. I ignored her outburst entirely, focusing solely on Evelyn. The third item in that folder, I continued, is a certified transcript of an audio recording taken last night at Chop's Lobster Bar. In that transcript, you will find Simone explicitly admitting that her pregnancy is a complete fabrication used to manipulate me. You will also read the exact confession of her husband, detailing how he bypassed the Department of Motor Vehicles digital security to commit federal wire fraud. That audio file was submitted to the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 7 o'clock this morning. The boardroom was dead silent except for the harsh, ragged breathing coming from Simone. Evelyn Sterling did not become the founder of a multi-million-dollar tech firm by being foolish. She possessed a razor-sharp legal mind and an absolute intolerance for nonsense. She quickly scanned the police report, noting the official seals and the federal case numbers. She read the first page of the certified audio transcript. Her eyes hardened. The temperature in the room dropped significantly. Evelyn slowly closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. She looked up at Simone. The expression on her face was one of absolute freezing disgust. You came into my firm, Evelyn stated, her voice deadly quiet. You sat in my chair, you drank my coffee, and you lied to my face while attempting to ruin the career of my top consultant to cover up your husband's federal crimes. It is not true, Simone stammered, taking a step back toward the door. She is twisting everything. You have to believe me. Evelyn did not even blink. She reached out and pressed the intercom button on her desk. Security, she commanded. I need 2 guards in the executive boardroom immediately. We have a trespasser. No, Simone gasped, panic fully taking over. You cannot do this. I am the victim here. She is abusing our family. Within 30 seconds, the heavy double doors swung open. 2 large security guards dressed in sharp black suits stepped into the room. Escort this woman out of the building, Evelyn ordered, pointing a manicured finger at Simone. If she resists, call the Atlanta Police Department and press charges for trespassing and corporate harassment. If she ever sets foot within 500 yards of this plaza again, you are authorized to use force. Simone lost whatever shred of dignity she had left. She began screaming frantically as the guards grabbed her by the arms. Let go of me, she shrieked, her designer heels dragging across the expensive carpet. Naomi, you cannot let them do this. Tell them to let me go. You are my sister. I sat perfectly still, watching her struggle. You ceased being my sister the moment you tried to steal my life, I replied coldly. Enjoy the walk of shame, Simone. The guards hauled her backward out of the boardroom. Her screaming echoed down the pristine glass hallways of Luminate Tech Partners, drawing the attention of dozens of executives and consultants who stepped out of their offices to watch the spectacle. Simone, the ultimate golden child, who built her entire identity on projecting a flawless image of black excellence, was being physically dragged out of a corporate lobby like a common criminal. Her public humiliation was absolute and irreversible. When the doors finally closed, cutting off the sound of her frantic shrieks, the boardroom returned to its former quiet state. I looked at Evelyn. "I am deeply sorry for the disruption to our morning, Evelyn," I said. "I will ensure it never happens again." Evelyn looked at me, her stern expression slowly softening into a look of genuine, profound respect. She slid the folder back across the table toward me. "Do not apologize," Naomi Evelyn said firmly. "You handled a hostile corporate threat with perfect documentation and absolute precision. That is exactly why you are my top consultant. But I highly suggest you take the rest of the morning to visit the courthouse." I nodded, placing the documents back into my briefcase and snapping the gold clasps shut. "I am already on it, Evelyn." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. I walked straight out of the building, hailed a private car, and went directly to the Fulton County Courthouse. I sat in a sterile legal office and filed an immediate emergency restraining order against Simone DeAndre, Valerie, and Julian. I detailed the harassment, the grand theft, and the targeted attempt to destroy my professional livelihood. The judge granted the temporary order within the hour, barring my family from coming anywhere near my home, my workplace, or my person. They had tried to launch a preemptive strike to ruin my career, but all they had accomplished was handing me the legal ammunition I needed to build a fortress around myself. The corporate backstab had failed spectacularly. Now I had federal authorities investigating their crimes and a judge enforcing my boundaries. My professional shield was completely restored, and my mind was entirely clear. It was time to return to Attorney Sterling's office. It was time to execute the financial masterstroke that would strip them of everything they owned. The executive suite of Attorney Sterling's firm became my second home over the next 2 weeks. We traded the sleek glass walls of my tech consultancy for the heavy oak paneling and endless legal archives of his downtown office. The air smelled of old paper and bitter black coffee. Spread across the massive conference table were dozens of financial records, bank statements, and wire transfer logs. We had initiated a full forensic audit of my family's financial footprint. I was applying the exact same systematic logic I used to debug massive corporate software networks to debug my own bloodline. Every transaction was a line of code. Every hidden bank account was a hidden directory. I was determined to trace every single penny back to its source. Sterling had brought in an independent private investigator to assist us. His name was Elias, an ex-federal forensic accountant who specialized in tracking offshore funds and illicit debt. Elias was a quiet man who let his data do the talking. He had spent the last 10 days digging deep into the digital footprint of DeAndre, Simone, and my parents. What he uncovered was the labyrinth of financial desperation and reckless greed that far exceeded my initial calculations. It started with Simone. I had already known her pregnancy announcement at the steakhouse was a manipulative tactic, but Elias provided the definitive proof. He pulled up her medical insurance claims and credit card histories. There were no charges for prenatal vitamins, no co-pays for obstetrician visits, and no ultrasound appointments. Instead, her recent credit card statements showed massive charges at luxury boutiques, high-end day spas, and exclusive cocktail lounges across Buckhead. She had literally purchased a $1,000 bottle of champagne 2 days after claiming she was carrying a child. The pregnancy was a complete fabrication designed exclusively to shield her husband from federal prison and guilt-trip me into signing away my rights. It was a vile strategy, but it completely aligned with her narcissistic nature. However, Simone's fake pregnancy was practically harmless compared to the financial crater DeAndre had dug for himself. Elias slid a red folder across the conference table. The contents of that folder painted a picture of a man spiraling into absolute ruin. DeAndre was not just a slick finance manager making bad administrative decisions. He was a severe gambling addict. Elias had tracked a series of encrypted wire transfers and cash withdrawals from DeAndre's secondary bank accounts. The trail led directly to an underground sports betting syndicate operating out of a high-stakes poker ring in Atlanta. DeAndre was drowning in $200,000 of illicit gambling debt. He had been chasing his losses for over a year, leveraging his dealership income and maxing out secret credit cards to keep the loan sharks at bay. But the syndicate had finally cut off his credit line. They were demanding immediate repayment, and underground creditors do not send polite collection letters. They send enforcers. This was the true catalyst for the grand theft auto and the fraudulent title transfer. DeAndre had not stolen my $90,000 Audi e-tron just to boost Simone's real estate image. He had intended to use the vehicle as collateral. He planned to wash the title, flip the car for fast cash through a shadow buyer, and use the proceeds to temporarily placate the loan sharks. My biometric lockdown had completely bricked his only escape route, leaving him totally exposed to his dangerous creditors. But Elias was not finished. He pulled up a complex digital schematic on the conference room monitor illustrating the flow of funds related to the sprawling McMansion my parents had purchased for Simone and DeAndre. This was where Julian and Valerie's complicity transformed into absolute financial suicide. When my parents forged grandmother Vivian's signature to siphon $500,000 from her family trust, they did not use the money to buy the house outright. Instead, they used that $500,000 as a massive down payment to secure a highly leveraged subprime mortgage. The total cost of the Alpharetta estate was $2.5 million. Julian and Valerie had placed themselves as the primary guarantors on the remaining $2 million loan, using their own names and their projected future inheritance to secure the financing. DeAndre, realizing that my Audi was no longer accessible, had devised a new desperate plan. I was currently attempting to take out a second mortgage on that very same McMansion. He planned to forge Julian and Valerie's signatures on the loan documents, extract $200,000 in cash equity from the property, and pay off his gambling syndicate. I was going to leverage a house bought with stolen money by stealing from the people who had stolen it for him. The sheer audacity of the scheme was almost impressive in its depravity. Sterling took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We have more than enough evidence to go to the authorities, Naomi," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "We can hand this entire dossier over to the FBI and the local district attorney. The fraud, the forgery, the illegal gambling ties. DeAndre will be arrested within 24 hours. Julian and Valerie will be indicted for the initial trust fund theft. The state will seize the house. We can end this right now through the standard legal channels." I stared at the financial schematic glowing on the monitor. The standard legal channels would indeed put them behind bars. But handing the evidence over to the police meant handing over control. It meant the government would dictate the timeline. It meant plea deals and negotiations. It meant my parents could still play the victims for the media, crying about how their ruthless daughter sent them to prison. I did not want to send them to prison. I wanted to own them. "No," I said, my voice completely steady. "We are not calling the cops yet. The police will just lock them in a cell. I want to lock them in a trap of their own making. I want them to feel the walls closing in. I want to be the one holding the keys to their entire existence." Sterling raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "What exactly do you have in mind, Naomi?" I stood up and walked over to the monitor, tracing the digital lines connecting DeAndre's gambling debt to Julian and Valerie's fraudulent mortgage. "I am a software engineer," I explained, turning back to Sterling and Elias. "When a system is infected with a virus, you do not just smash the computer. You quarantine the malware. You isolate the corrupted files, and you rewrite the administrative permissions until the virus has absolutely nowhere left to execute its code. My family is a virus, and I am going to rewrite their reality." I authorized Sterling to utilize a sophisticated corporate vehicle. Within the vast $40 million empire my grandmother had entrusted to me, there were several dormant shell companies. We activated an entity named Obsidian Holdings LLC. It was a completely blind trust, shielded by layers of corporate privacy laws, making it impossible for anyone to trace its true ownership back to me. First, we targeted DeAndre's gambling debt. Elias, acting as a proxy agent for Obsidian Holdings, reached out to the underground syndicate. Loan sharks are businessmen at their core. They prefer clean liquid cash over the hassle of sending enforcers to break kneecaps. Elias negotiated a quiet buyout of DeAndre's entire $200,000 marker. Obsidian Holdings purchased the debt in full at a premium, paying the syndicate in untraceable cryptocurrency. Overnight, the dangerous men, threatening DeAndre's life, simply walked away. But his debt did not disappear. It was legally and permanently transferred to Obsidian Holdings. DeAndre thought he had caught a miraculous break. He had no idea he had just traded a violent street creditor for an absolutely merciless corporate overlord. I was now legally entitled to call in his debt at any moment of my choosing. Next, we moved on to the fraudulent mortgage. The subprime lender holding the $2 million note on Simone and DeAndre's McMansion was a predatory institution that specialized in high-risk loans. They were highly motivated to offload debt that was guaranteed by potentially volatile assets. Sterling approached the lender, representing Obsidian Holdings as a private equity firm interested in acquiring high-yield real estate portfolios. Using the liquid capital from my grandmother's empire, we purchased the mortgage note in its entirety. We bought the paper right out from under the original lender. The transaction was swift, quiet, and entirely legal. The deed to the Alpharetta estate was transferred into the portfolio of Obsidian Holdings. Julian and Valerie were still listed as the primary guarantors on the loan. Simone and DeAndre were still living in the house, believing they were the kings and queens of suburban Atlanta. But the reality of their situation had fundamentally and catastrophically shifted. They were no longer paying their mortgage to a faceless bank. They were completely at the mercy of my shell company. By the end of the second week, the financial web was perfectly woven. The trap was set and the steel jaws were ready to snap shut. I sat in Sterling's office reviewing the final transfer documents. I held the legal rights to DeAndre's gambling debt. I held the mortgage to the mansion. I held the undeniable proof of Julian and Valerie's grand larceny regarding the trust fund. I had completely surrounded them. I owned their past crimes, I owned their present liabilities, and I owned their future ruin. Every step they took from this moment forward was on ground that I legally controlled. They were completely oblivious to the sword dangling directly over their heads. In fact, they were so insulated by their own arrogance that Simone and DeAndre had just mailed out invitations for a massive, lavish housewarming party at the very mansion I now owned. They invited the entirety of Atlanta's black elite to celebrate their fake wealth and their stolen lifestyle. They were planning a spectacular coronation for themselves. I looked at the gold-embossed invitation that had been forwarded to me by a mutual acquaintance. The party was scheduled for Saturday night. It was the perfect stage. It was the perfect audience. Sterling watched me as I neatly stacked the legal documents and placed them inside my leather briefcase. "Are we ready to execute the final phase, Naomi?" he asked, his tone reflecting the gravity of what we had just orchestrated. "We are ready, Sterling," I replied, snapping the gold clasps of the briefcase shut. "They want to throw a party to celebrate their stolen empire. I think it is only polite that the true owner of the estate shows up to welcome the guests." I walked out of the law firm and into the bright Atlanta sunlight. The pieces were all in place. The data was verified. The system was locked. It was time to crash their server permanently. Let the housewarming begin. Saturday evening descended upon the affluent suburbs of Alpharetta, draped in a humid southern heat and the suffocating stench of stolen money. The sprawling McMansion that Simone and DeAndre now occupied sat at the end of a long manicured cul-de-sac. The property was a grotesque monument to their fraudulent ambition. It featured towering Roman columns, a sweeping circular driveway, and a massive wrought iron gate that had been left wide open to welcome the elite of Atlanta. Simone and DeAndre had spared absolutely no expense to project their manufactured image of black excellence. They had hired a fleet of private valets, who were currently busy parking a seemingly endless parade of Range Rovers, Mercedes-Benzes, and Aston Martins. A string quartet played near the entrance, transitioning smoothly into a high-end DJ set that pumped heavy bass across the meticulously landscaped front lawn. Professional caterers in crisp white uniforms circulated through the massive custom-built home, carrying silver trays of caviar, Wagyu beef sliders, and vintage champagne. At the center of this opulent circus, my family paraded around, like undisputed royalty. Julian and Valerie were in their element, completely intoxicated by the illusion of their own grandeur. My father wore a bespoke velvet dinner jacket holding a crystal glass of dark liquor and gesturing grandly as he entertained a group of wealthy real estate developers. I was actively bragging about his business acumen, claiming that his strategic investments had secured this multi-million-dollar estate for his daughter. My mother Valerie was equally insufferable. She floated through the crowds of Atlanta's socialites draped in heavy diamonds and a flowing emerald gown. She repeatedly accepted compliments on the magnificent home, smiling modestly, while claiming that her family had always believed in generational wealth. They were completely oblivious to the fact that their generational wealth was built entirely on a foundation of federal wire fraud and identity theft. They were dancing on top of a financial landmine, and they believed they were flying. Simone held court on the expansive marble patio overlooking the pristine swimming pool. She wore a skin-tight designer gown that she constantly smoothed over her stomach, deliberately highlighting her completely fabricated pregnancy. She accepted lavish gifts and fawning praise from her guests, playing the role of the perfect wealthy expectant mother to absolute perfection. DeAndre stood beside her, laughing loudly and clinking glasses with local politicians and affluent businessmen. He wore a custom-tailored suit, but underneath the expensive fabric I knew he was a dead man walking. I knew the underground gambling syndicate had been paid off by my shell company just days prior. I knew he believed he had miraculously escaped his $200,000 debt. I thought he was invincible. The display of arrogance was sickening, but it was also precisely the stage I needed for my final execution command. At exactly 8:30 in the evening, a custom black Maybach glided past the busy valets and pulled to a smooth stop directly at the base of the grand front steps. The valet attendants rushed forward, but Attorney Sterling had already stepped out of the passenger side. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit, his presence radiating cold, unyielding authority. He walked around to the rear of the luxury vehicle and opened the door for me. I stepped out into the humid night air, wearing a razor-sharp white pantsuit that contrasted violently with the dark night. I did not look like a guest arriving to celebrate. I looked like a corporate executioner arriving to liquidate an asset. Sterling and I turned back to the vehicle to assist the true architect of this empire. Grandmother Vivian emerged from the Maybach, taking her seat in a sleek, custom-built motorized wheelchair. Despite her declining health and her frail physical frame, her aura was absolutely terrifying. She wore a structured black dress and a string of authentic pearls that cost more than the fraudulent down payment on this very house. She sat perfectly straight, her chin raised, her dark eyes scanning the opulent party with pure, unadulterated disgust. We moved as a united front, ascending the wide stone steps toward the massive double doors of the mansion. The string quartet was still playing, but as we crossed the threshold into the grand foyer, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was as if the air conditioning had been turned down to freezing. The wealthy guests closest to the entrance noticed Vivian first. You do not survive in the upper echelons of Atlanta society without knowing the face of Vivian Sterling. The crowd parted instinctively, stepping back to clear a path for the billionaire matriarch. The whispers began immediately, rippling outward through the massive house like a sudden wave. Julian was in the middle of a loud, boastful story when he caught sight of us. The crystal glass in his hand slipped, shattering against the marble floor. The dark liquor splashed across his expensive Italian leather shoes, but he did not even look down. His face drained of all color, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. Valerie, who was laughing with a group of socialites across the room, turned her head to follow her husband's gaze. The artificial smile on her face collapsed so fast it looked painful. They had not invited Vivienne. They had certainly not invited me. They believed they had successfully isolated themselves in their stolen fortress, far away from the consequences of their actions. Seeing the three of us advancing through their party was their worst nightmare made flesh. Simone, however, lacked the situational awareness of her parents. She was entirely blinded by her own narcissism. When she spotted me walking through her grand foyer flanked by Sterling and our grandmother, her immediate reaction was not fear. It was blinding, furious indignation. How dare I show up and steal the attention on her special night? How dare I bring the grandmother they had stolen from right to the scene of the crime? Simone handed her champagne flute to a passing waiter and marched directly toward us. Her designer gown swept across the marble as she closed the distance, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, arrogant hostility. She planted herself firmly in front of me, blocking our path to the main living room. "What are you doing here, Naomi?" Simone demanded, her voice shrill and echoing over the low thumping bass of the DJ's music. "You were not invited to this house. You have absolutely no right to step foot on my property after the way you treated this family." I looked at her, taking in the fake pregnancy, the stolen wealth, and the sheer desperate delusion. I did not say a word. I simply looked at her with cold, clinical detachment. "Did you come to beg for forgiveness?" Simone sneered, taking a step closer and crossing her arms over her chest. "Did you finally realize that you are completely alone and you need us to take you back in? Or are you just here to eat our food and ruin my housewarming party because you are miserable and jealous of my success?" Julian rushed forward, grabbing Simone's arm and trying to pull her back. "Simone, shut your mouth," he hissed, his eyes darting frantically toward Vivian. "You do not know what you are doing. Be quiet right now." But Simone yanked her arm out of his grip, completely oblivious to the impending doom. "No, Dad, I will not be quiet," Simone yelled, ensuring the entire foyer was watching the spectacle. "Naomi thinks she can just waltz into my multi-million-dollar home after disrespecting my husband and threatening our family. She needs to learn her place. This is my house. I am the lady of this estate and I want her thrown out immediately." Valerie hurried over, her hands shaking visibly as she tried to intervene. "Vivian, please," Valerie stammered, directing her panic at my grandmother. "Simone is just stressed about the baby. We did not expect you tonight. Let us go into the private study and discuss whatever is bothering you. We can handle this privately. Please do not make a scene in front of our guests." Grandmother Vivian did not speak to Valerie. She did not even look at her. Vivian kept her fierce eyes locked entirely on Simone, a cold smile touching the corners of her mouth. I remained perfectly silent, letting Simone's arrogant words hang heavily in the air. I let her claim ownership of the house. I let her demand my removal. I let her dig her own grave as deeply as she possibly could. I knew that every syllable of her boastful rant was going to make the next 5 minutes infinitely more devastating. "Naomi, say something," Simone demanded, stamping her foot against the marble floor. "Are you deaf? I said get out of my house." I calmly raised my left arm, pushing back the sleeve of my white blazer to reveal my luxury timepiece. I looked at the sleek watch face. I watched the second hand sweep smoothly across the dial, ticking down the final moments of their fraudulent existence. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I looked back up at Simone, keeping my face entirely blank. The heavy thumping bass of the DJ's music was suddenly pierced by a high-pitched wailing sound coming from outside. At first it was faint, a distant noise carrying over the humid night air. But within seconds the sound multiplied and grew exponentially louder. It was a chaotic, overlapping chorus of aggressive sirens, tearing through the quiet suburban neighborhood and heading straight for the cul-de-sac. The guests near the open front doors began to murmur in confusion, stepping out onto the grand portico to see what was causing the disturbance. The loud, blaring sirens reached a deafening pitch, drowning out the music entirely. Suddenly, the roar of heavy engines echoed up the driveway. 3 massive black sport utility vehicles equipped with reinforced steel push bumpers smashed through the open wrought iron gates of the estate. They were flanked by 4 marked local police cruisers, their tires screeching aggressively as they swerved onto the pristine circular driveway. Intense flashing red and blue lights instantly illuminated the massive columns of the McMansion, casting a violent, chaotic glare through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the foyer. The harsh strobe lights bathed Simone's horrified face in alternating colors of red and blue. The tactical boots of the federal agents hit the marble portico with heavy, rhythmic thuds that vibrated through the floorboards of the grand foyer. Panic swept through the elite crowd like wildfire. Guests who had just been sipping vintage champagne and exchanging business cards were now shoving each other out of the way, desperate to distance themselves from whatever criminal activity was about to unfold. The DJ abruptly killed the music, leaving only the deafening wail of the sirens and the frantic shouts of the fleeing attendees. Simone stood completely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The smug arrogance that had defined her entire existence evaporated in a matter of seconds, replaced by a primal, suffocating terror. DeAndre, who had been holding court on the patio, suddenly appeared at the edge of the foyer, his eyes darting frantically toward the back doors, searching for an escape route that no longer existed. Julian and Valerie collapsed against each other, watching their carefully constructed empire of lies disintegrate under the harsh glare of the federal strobe lights. They had stolen from their own family to build a fortress of luxury, and now that very fortress had become their prison. I slowly lowered my arm, letting my watch slide back under the cuff of my blazer. I looked directly into Simone's panicked eyes, enjoying the absolute destruction of her false reality. "I did not come to eat your food, Simone." I finally spoke, my voice cutting cleanly through the chaotic noise of the raid. "I came to watch you choke on it." The heavy oak front doors were shoved completely open as the lead federal agents breached the threshold, their badges flashing under the crystal chandeliers. The reckoning had arrived. 5 heavily armed agents wearing dark tactical vests, stamped with the letters FBI across the back, fanned out across the grand foyer. The lead agent locked his sharp eyes on his primary target. DeAndre had completely abandoned his proud host facade. He was actively trying to slip through the French doors near the catered buffet, hoping to disappear into the backyard. He did not make it far. 2 agents intercepted him, tackling him hard against the silver chafing dishes. A heavy tray of Wagyu beef sliders, an expensive caviar, crashed onto the imported marble floor, mixing with shattered crystal and spilled vintage champagne. DeAndre Washington, the lead agent, barked, grabbing DeAndre by the back of his tailored suit jacket and spinning him around violently. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, title washing, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The harsh metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly over the terrified gasps of the Atlanta elite. DeAndre slumped, his face pressed against the ruined buffet table, his designer clothes stained by cocktail sauce and his pride completely shattered. He looked like exactly what he was, a desperate thief caught dead to rights. Simone finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. She lunged forward, her voice breaking into a hysterical screech that pierced the room. "Get your hands off my husband. Do you know who we are? We are wealthy. You cannot treat us like common criminals. He is a respected finance manager." The lead agent did not even blink at her manufactured outrage. "Ma'am, step back right now, or you will be detained for interfering with a federal investigation. We have the digital transaction logs, the forged state seals, and the paper trail of the stolen biometric data. Your husband is facing 20 years in federal prison. Now step away." Simone stumbled backward, her hands dropping from her fake pregnancy bump. She stared at the handcuffs cutting into DeAndre's wrists, and reality finally pierced her delusion. This was not a minor misunderstanding that her parents could buy their way out of. This was the federal government systematically dismantling her life. Julian and Valerie were hyperventilating near the grand staircase. The guests they had spent months trying to impress, the city council members, the real estate magnates, the socialites they so desperately wanted to emulate, were backing away from them, like they carried a highly contagious disease. Phones were out everywhere. Flash photography illuminated my parents. Absolute shame, recording every agonizing second for the local gossip blogs and high society social media channels. Valerie, realizing her social standing was evaporating in real time, resorted to the only tactic she knew. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger directly at me and began screaming at the top of her lungs. "She did this. This is all her fault. She is a jealous snake. Look at her standing there laughing at us." I was not laughing. I was just watching her self-destruct with absolute clinical detachment. My mind replayed all the years of constant emotional abuse and financial neglect. This exact moment of their public downfall was the only justice I ever needed. "Do not listen to them!" Valerie yelled, spinning wildly to address the horrified crowd of partygoers. She grabbed the arm of a prominent local socialite who immediately ripped her hand away in disgust. "My oldest daughter, Naomi, is completely unhinged," Valerie continued, sobbing loudly. "She is a bitter, lonely woman who hates her sister's massive success. She fabricated these federal charges because she is jealous of Simone's beautiful new home and her growing family. She hacked the government computers to frame poor DeAndre. She is a pathological liar. She is trying to destroy us because we did not invite her tonight. Julian puffed out his chest, trying to summon the patriarchal authority he had used to intimidate me my entire life. He marched toward the federal agents, his face a mask of false righteous outrage. Officers, I demand you release my son-in-law immediately. This is a private residence. We are prominent citizens of Buckhead. My daughter Naomi is having a severe mental breakdown. We will generously drop the trespassing charges against her if you just leave right now. This is a severe misunderstanding, and I will be calling the mayor to have your badges for this unacceptable intrusion. The lead agent looked at Julian with an expression of pure pity, mixed with intense disgust. Sir, the mayor left through the back patio 5 minutes ago when he saw my badge. And unless you want to be read your rights for conspiracy to commit wire fraud regarding the title of an Audi e-tron, I highly suggest you remain entirely silent. We have the audio recordings from Chop's Lobster Bar, Julian. We know exactly what you did. We know exactly how you supplied the forged documents. You are an active participant in a massive criminal enterprise designed to exploit an elderly billionaire. Julian's mouth snapped shut. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and incredibly weak. The mention of the audio recording hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He staggered backward, bumping into Valerie. Their desperate gaslighting had failed spectacularly. The wealthy guests, who had been eating their food and drinking their champagne just minutes ago, were now whispering fiercely among themselves, shaking their heads in absolute revulsion. The facade of black excellence was gone, replaced by the pathetic reality of a family of desperate grifters. Attorney Sterling checked his luxury watch, smoothing the lapels of his immaculate charcoal suit. He turned to me and gave a single curt nod. It was time for the final blow. Sterling walked calmly through the absolute chaos, stepping gracefully over the shattered glass and discarded hors d'oeuvres. He approached the raised platform where the DJ stood frozen behind his expensive turntables. Sterling gestured for the microphone. The DJ handed it over without a single word, stepping back quickly to avoid getting caught in the inevitable crossfire. Sterling tapped the microphone twice. The sharp feedback echoed through the cavernous foyer, cutting effortlessly through Valerie's weeping and Simone's frantic sobbing. Every eye in the massive mansion turned toward the distinguished lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, Sterling announced, his deep baritone voice commanding absolute unwavering attention. My name is Arthur Sterling. I am the primary legal counsel for the Vivian Sterling estate. I sincerely apologize for the abrupt interruption to your evening, but there is a crucial matter of property law that requires your immediate attention. The crowd leaned in, captivated by the sheer cinematic drama unfolding before them. Grandmother Vivian sat perfectly still in her sleek wheelchair, her dark eyes observing the total annihilation of her greedy descendants with a look of profound satisfaction. Julian and Valerie have proudly presented themselves to you tonight as successful real estate investors and affluent members of this elite community. Sterling continued pacing slowly across the elevated platform. They have invited you into this magnificent home to celebrate their daughter's immense prosperity. However, everything you see around you is a complete and utter mirage. This family did not purchase this estate through hard work or generational wealth. They purchased it through grand larceny. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. Valerie buried her face in her hands, unable to look at her former friends. Julian stared at the floor, physically shrinking under the intense public humiliation. Julian and Valerie Washington forged documents to illegally siphon $500,000 from my client's trust fund to use as a down payment for this property, Sterling declared, projecting his voice to the very back of the enormous room. They leveraged stolen money to secure a subprime mortgage they could never afford. Furthermore, DeAndre Washington attempted to steal a luxury vehicle to pay off $200,000 in underground gambling debt, which is precisely why he is currently wearing federal handcuffs. Simone let out a guttural wail, dropping to her knees on the cold marble floor. Her fake pregnancy bump shifted awkwardly, but no one rushed forward to help her up. They were all too busy staring at Sterling, mesmerized by the absolute destruction of the Washington family. But that is not the most important piece of information you need to hear tonight, Sterling said, his eyes finding mine across the room. I stood proudly beside Grandmother Vivian watching the final execution command take effect. The original subprime lender, holding the fraudulent mortgage on this estate, realized the massive liability of this debt. Consequently, they sold the entire mortgage package on the private equity market. The underground syndicate holding DeAndre's gambling debt also aggressively sold their marker to recoup their losses. As of 8 o'clock this morning, those debts were consolidated and purchased in full by a corporate entity known as Obsidian Holdings LLC. Sterling paused, letting the heavy silence stretch for maximum dramatic impact. He raised his hand and pointed a steady finger directly at me. Obsidian Holdings LLC is entirely owned and operated by the woman standing right there, Naomi. As of this morning, my client Naomi holds the deed to this property. She holds 100% of the fraudulent mortgage. She holds every single penny of DeAndre's illicit gambling debt. She is the sole legal owner of this massive estate and everything inside it. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, that Julian, Valerie, Simone, and DeAndre are not your wealthy hosts tonight. They are desperate squatters who are currently facing severe federal indictment, and all of you are trespassing on her magnificent private estate. The crowd gasped as the cold, hard truth hit them all at once, leaving them completely, totally, absolutely speechless. Then the spell broke and pure self-preservation took over. The exodus was instantaneous and utterly chaotic. The wealthy socialites and influential politicians stampeded toward the exits. Women in designer gowns hoisted their expensive hemlines and sprinted across the marble foyer, desperate to escape the blast radius. Men in tailored tuxedos shoved past each other, abandoning their half-empty champagne flutes on any available flat surface. Nobody wanted to be caught on camera associating with confessed felons and fraudsters. The hired catering staff quietly retreated, leaving trays of ruined food scattered across the floor. Outside, the valet stand devolved into a shouting match as panicked guests demanded their vehicles at once. Car doors slammed and tires squealed against the asphalt as the elite of Atlanta fled the toxic epicenter of the Washington family collapse. Within 10 minutes, the sprawling McMansion transformed from a vibrant celebration of fake wealth into a hollow, silent tomb. The only sounds remaining were the heavy footsteps of the federal agents and the pathetic sniffling of my relatives. The glittering illusion of black excellence had evaporated, leaving nothing but the ugly, rotting core of their shared greed. I stood beside Grandmother Vivian and Attorney Sterling, watching the absolute desolation of their social empire. It was a beautiful catastrophe. The lead federal agent yanked DeAndre upward by the collar of his ruined suit jacket. DeAndre stumbled, his wrists securely bound behind his back in heavy steel cuffs. The cocky finance manager who had stolen my car and mocked my career was now reduced to a trembling, weeping mess. He did not even look at Simone. As the agents hauled him roughly toward the front door, Simone crawled across the marble floor, reaching out for him with a desperate, trembling hand. "DeAndre, please." Simone wailed, her voice cracking under the weight of her sudden reality. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them to stop." DeAndre finally turned his head to look down at her. There was no love in his eyes. There was only the bitter resentment of a cornered rat. "Shut up, Simone," he hissed, spitting the words with pure venom. "Your greedy mother pushed me into this with your constant whining about needing a bigger house and better clothes. You are the reason I'm going to federal prison." The agents shoved him forward, marching him out into the humid night air and throwing him into the back of an armored federal SUV. The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. Simone collapsed, burying her face against the cold floor, her fake pregnancy bump shifting awkwardly beneath her dress. The sheer shock of DeAndre's departure shattered the fragile bonds of our toxic family. The superficial loyalty they had used against me dissolved into a brutal free-for-all. They were drowning scavengers fighting over floating debris. Valerie's face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She marched across the foyer, her emerald gown dragging through spilled champagne. She grabbed Simone by the shoulder of her dress and yanked her upright. Valerie pulled her arm back and delivered a vicious, ringing slap across Simone's cheek. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the cavernous foyer. Simone staggered backward, clutching her face in absolute shock. "Mom," she gasped, her eyes wide with betrayal. Valerie did not stop. She raised her hand again, her voice reaching a hysterical shriek. Do not call me Mom, you stupid, useless girl, Valerie screamed. You and that low-life criminal husband of yours just ruined my entire life. You humiliated me in front of the entire Buckhead elite. I risked my own financial security to buy you this massive estate. And how do you repay me? By marrying a degenerate gambling addict who brings the FBI to my front door. Simone, recovering from the shock, bared her teeth and fired right back. You sacrificed for me, Simone screamed, pointing an accusing finger at Valerie. You never cared about me. You only cared about how my life made you look to your friends. You told DeAndre to wash the car title. You forged Grandma's signature on the trust documents. You masterminded this entire embezzlement because you are too lazy to work for your own money. You are a greedy, manipulative monster, and you dragged me down with you. They stood inches apart, screaming profanities and tearing each other to pieces. The golden child and the narcissistic mother were showing their true colors. It was an ugly display of raw selfishness. There was no love between them. There had never been any love. There was only a shared transaction of vanity and greed, and now that the currency had run out, the transaction was brutally cancelled. While Valerie and Simone destroyed each other, Julian realized the severity of his own legal peril. He looked around the empty mansion and understood his life of luxury was completely over. He had no money. He had no career prospects. The federal government was preparing to indict him for wire fraud. His only chance for survival was the woman sitting silently in the wheelchair. Julian threw his pride away entirely. He walked over to Grandmother Vivian and dropped heavily to his knees. The patriarch who had demanded my obedience was now groveling like a beggar. He clasped his hands together, looking up at Vivian with tears streaming down his face. "Mother, please," Julian sobbed, his voice trembling with pathetic desperation. "You have to help me. You have to tell the authorities it was a misunderstanding. I did not want to steal from you. Valerie made me do it. She poisoned my mind. She told me you owed us that money for putting up with your strict rules. She manipulated me into forging the signature. You know I am a good son. Please do not let them send me to prison. I will do anything you want. I will divorce Valerie tomorrow. Just please protect me." Vivian looked down at her son with an expression of absolute freezing disgust. She did not reach out to comfort him. She did not offer a single word of forgiveness. "You are a grown man." Julian, Vivian said, her voice cutting through his pathetic sobbing like a razor blade. "You made your choices. You stole from your own mother to buy the affection of a vain woman and a spoiled child. You threw away a brilliant, hardworking daughter because her quiet success threatened your fragile ego. You are not a victim. You are a coward, and I do not protect cowards. Do not ever call me your mother again." Julian slumped forward, burying his face in his hands, weeping loudly as the finality of her rejection crushed his spirit. I stood there observing the utter devastation with absolute ice in my veins. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I watched them tear each other apart, betraying their sacred vows and throwing their own blood to the wolves to save themselves. This was the family that demanded my loyalty. This was the family that called me a failure. They were pathetic. I walked slowly to the center of the foyer, stepping cleanly around the broken glass and ruined food. My white pantsuit remained completely immaculate, a stark contrast to their disheveled appearances. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The quiet authority of my presence demanded their absolute attention. Valerie stopped screaming at Simone. Julian stopped his pathetic sobbing. They all turned to look at me, their eyes wide with fear and desperate anticipation. They knew I held their future in the palm of my hand. Julian opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg me for mercy, but I raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. "You wanted to know what my work was worth," I stated, my voice echoing in the mansion. "You wanted to know why I spent years typing on a keyboard while you funded Simone's fake reality. This is what it was worth. The ability to dismantle your existence without breaking sweat." I looked at my watch, noting the time. "You are trespassing on property owned by Obsidian Holdings, LLC. I continued, staring into Valerie's terrified eyes. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack whatever fits into garbage bags and vacate my property. Take items purchased with stolen funds, and I will have you arrested for burglary. If you are not gone in 60 minutes, the police will drag you out for criminal trespassing." I paused, letting the finality of my decree sink in. They had no leverage. Oh, and one more thing I added, turning to Simone, who was shivering on the floor. Leave the keys to my Audi on the kitchen counter. I turned my back on them and walked toward the front door, escorting Grandmother Vivian and Attorney Sterling into the warm Atlanta night, leaving the miserable rats to scavenge their sinking ship. True to my word, I had instructed the private security firm to enforce the strict 60-minute eviction deadline. When the hour expired, Julian and Valerie were physically escorted out of the grand estate, carrying nothing but generic black plastic garbage bags, stuffed with whatever clothes and personal items they could frantically grab. Their luxury vehicles had been seized. Their credit cards were completely frozen. Their sprawling network of affluent friends had universally blocked their phone numbers. Within the span of a single evening, the former king and queen of Atlanta high society were reduced to absolute vagrants standing on the curb of a suburban street with absolutely nowhere to go. The descent into extreme poverty hit them with the force of a freight train. Stripped of their stolen wealth, they were forced to rent a single room in a decaying roach-infested motel located off a noisy industrial highway miles away from the manicured lawns of Buckhead. The cramped room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cleaning chemicals. For two people who had spent decades indulging in vintage champagne and fine dining, the reality of eating cheap canned soup on a stained mattress was a psychological torture they were entirely ill-equipped to handle. But narcissistic entitlement is a stubborn disease. Instead of accepting their massive defeat and seeking honest employment, Julian and Valerie allowed their desperation to fester into a toxic delusion. They convinced themselves that they were the true victims of a grand, elaborate conspiracy. They refused to believe that I, a daughter they had deemed worthless, could outsmart them so thoroughly without resorting to foul play. Driven by this manic delusion, they concocted one final pathetic scheme to reclaim their stolen empire. They managed to find a sleazy, predatory attorney operating out of a dilapidated strip mall who was willing to take a massive gamble. The lawyer agreed to represent them on a contingency fee basis, blinded by the prospect of tapping into Grandmother Vivian's $40 million estate. Their legal strategy was as predictable as it was disgusting. Julian and Valerie filed a civil lawsuit in the Fulton County Family Court, claiming severe elder abuse and psychological coercion. The lawsuit alleged that I had weaponized my technological expertise to isolate a frail, senile old woman, manipulating her failing mind to illegally sign over her power of attorney. They demanded an emergency injunction to immediately freeze my control over the estate and requested the immediate reinstatement of their generous monthly financial stipends. When the official subpoena arrived at my sleek new corporate office, I was sitting across from Attorney Sterling, reviewing the architectural plans for my next business venture. I read the legal summons detailing the absurd accusations of elder abuse, and I actually laughed out loud. The sheer audacity of Julian and Valerie attempting to use the justice system to steal from the very woman they had already embezzled $500,000 from was staggering. But I was not angry. I was entirely amused because Sterling and I were already 10 steps ahead of their desperate little maneuver. Did they honestly believe we would execute a $40 million transfer of power without securing absolute bulletproof documentation? Sterling asked, sipping his black coffee with a confident smirk. They are desperate, Sterling, I replied, tossing the subpoena onto my glass desk. Desperation makes people incredibly stupid. They think they can walk into a courtroom and cry fake tears to manipulate a judge the same way they manipulated their social circle for decades. They have absolutely no idea what kind of trap they are walking into. When the day of the emergency hearing arrived, the atmosphere inside the Fulton County Courthouse was dense and formal. I wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit that projected absolute authority and calm competence. Sterling walked beside me carrying a single slim leather briefcase. We entered the courtroom and took our seats at the defense table. Moments later, Julian and Valerie walked in. The physical transformation they had undergone in just a few weeks was genuinely shocking. My father wore an old designer suit that now hung loosely on his depleted frame, highlighting his rapid weight loss and severe stress. My mother had lost her polished, radiant glow entirely. Her hair was unkempt and she clutched a cheap handbag, her eyes darting around the room with a wild, frantic energy. They looked exactly like the desperate scavengers they had become. Judge Harrison presided over the hearing. She was a veteran magistrate known throughout Atlanta for her razor-sharp intellect and her absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics. She adjusted her reading glasses and stared down at the plaintiffs. The sleazy strip mall attorney stood up and launched into a highly dramatic opening statement. He painted a tragic fictional picture of Julian and Valerie as devoted, loving children who had been forcefully ripped away from their ailing mother by a greedy, calculating predator. He pointed an accusing finger at me, claiming I had used cyber warfare and emotional abuse to coerce a vulnerable, mentally diminished billionaire into signing away her entire legacy. He pleaded with the court to grant the emergency injunction to save Vivian from my tyrannical control. Judge Harrison listened in absolute silence, her face a mask of stone. When the attorney finally finished his theatrical performance, she turned her gaze to our table. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Harrison said, her voice echoing clearly in the quiet courtroom. "The plaintiffs have made some exceptionally severe allegations regarding the mental capacity of Vivian Sterling and the legality of this power of attorney. How does the defense respond?" Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a calm, deliberate motion. "Your Honor, the defense responds by stating that this entire lawsuit is a malicious, fraudulent fabrication designed to extort my client. We do not require a lengthy trial to prove this. We only require 5 minutes of the court's time." Sterling approached the bench and handed the bailiff a secure encrypted flash drive along with a thick, bound folder bearing the seal of a premier medical institution. "Your Honor, when Vivian Sterling executed the power of attorney, handing control of her estate to her granddaughter, she was well aware of the predatory nature of her son and daughter-in-law," Sterling explained, pacing slowly before the judge. "Anticipating exactly this kind of frivolous legal attack, my client did not simply sign a piece of paper in private. The document was executed in the presence of two independent legal witnesses, a licensed notary and a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. Furthermore, the entire signing was recorded by a professional legal videographer." The color instantly drained from Julian's face. Valerie gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table, her knuckles turning completely white. Their predatory lawyer suddenly looked incredibly nervous, shuffling his papers as the realization of his monumental mistake set in. Judge Harrison instructed the bailiff to play the video on the courtroom monitor. The screen illuminated, showing grandmother Vivian sitting behind her massive mahogany desk, looking immaculate, sharp, and terrifyingly lucid. The board-certified psychiatrist off-camera asked Vivian to state her name, the date, and her primary intentions regarding her estate. Vivian looked directly into the camera lens with burning intensity. "My name is Vivian Sterling," she stated, her voice unwavering and commanding. "I am executing this power of attorney voluntarily and with absolute mental clarity to grant my granddaughter Naomi full executive control of my assets. I am taking this drastic action because my son Julian and his wife Valerie are thieves. They have repeatedly engaged in financial parasitism and recently committed wire fraud to siphon funds from my family trust. I am completely cutting them off. They are entitled to nothing." The video ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and heavy. Judge Harrison opened the medical folder Sterling had provided, verifying the comprehensive psychiatric evaluation that declared Vivian possessed the cognitive function of a woman 20 years her junior. There was no dementia. There was no coercion. There was only the cold, hard truth of a brilliant billionaire protecting her empire from her own greedy children. The judge slowly closed the folder. The expression on her face shifted from neutral observation to profound, unyielding anger. She looked down at Julian and Valerie, her eyes narrowing with pure judicial disgust. "I have presided over this court for 22 years, Judge Harrison said, her voice dripping with contempt. "And this is without a doubt one of the most transparently malicious and pathetic attempts to abuse the judicial system I have ever witnessed. You have come into my courtroom with absolutely zero evidence, relying entirely on fabricated slander to steal from an elderly woman who had the foresight to document your profound greed." The predatory attorney tried to salvage the situation, raising his hand weakly. "Your Honor, my clients sincerely believed that their mother was under undue influence. We can provide character witnesses who will testify to her changing behavior." "You will do no such thing," Judge Harrison snapped, slamming her hand onto her desk. "This case is dismissed with extreme prejudice." Julian let out a strangled gasp, dropping his head onto the table. Valerie began to sob, her shoulders shaking as the final desperate scheme completely disintegrated. But Judge Harrison was not finished. She leaned forward, gripping her gavel. "Furthermore, I find that this lawsuit was filed in bad faith specifically to harass the defendant and extort financial gain," Judge Harrison declared, her voice ringing with finality. "I am hereby sanctioning the plaintiffs and their legal counsel for filing a frivolous lawsuit. You will be held jointly responsible for all legal fees incurred by the defense in this matter." Valerie looked up, her face streaked with mascara, her eyes wide with terror. "Your Honor, please, we have nothing," Valerie begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "We are living in a motel. We have no money to pay legal fees. You cannot do this to us." Judge Harrison slammed her gavel down, creating a sharp crack that silenced the courtroom instantly. "I am not finished, Mrs. Washington," the judge stated coldly. "Attempting to use the court system to commit financial fraud by filing knowingly false claims is a severe violation of the law. Given the explicit testimony provided in this medical and video evidence detailing your prior embezzlement, I am officially forwarding the entire transcript of this hearing, along with the defense's evidence, directly to the district attorney's office. You will be facing a comprehensive criminal investigation for perjury and attempted fraud." The absolute devastation of those words struck Julian and Valerie like a physical execution. The realization that they had absolutely no power, no money, and no legal standing finally broke their spirit completely. They had tried to dig a grave for me, but they had only succeeded in burying themselves under federal and state criminal charges. Julian physically collapsed, sliding out of his chair and dropping to the courtroom floor, clutching his chest as he hyperventilated. Valerie sat frozen, staring blankly ahead, her mind completely shattered by the absolute certainty of her impending incarceration. They were ruined. I stood up, buttoning my navy blazer. I looked down at the two people who had tormented me my entire life, watching them drown in the consequences of their own toxic actions. I felt absolutely nothing for them. I turned my back on their pathetic weeping and walked out of the courtroom with Attorney Sterling by my side, stepping into the bright, warm light of my new reality. 6 months passed. The adrenaline that had fueled my systematic dismantling of Julian, Valerie, Simone, and DeAndre slowly faded, giving way to a profound and heavy quiet. The high-stakes corporate warfare and the dramatic courtroom victories were replaced by the sterile smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic, steady beeping of heart monitors. Grandmother Vivian's health, which had been the silent ticking clock beneath our entire operation, finally began to fail. Her body, having fought through decades of brutal corporate battles and the ultimate betrayal of her own children, was simply running out of time. We moved her into the VIP wing of Atlanta Medical Center. It was a luxury suite occupying the entire top floor, offering sweeping views of the city skyline. I spared absolutely no expense. I hired a team of elite private security contractors to guard the elevator banks 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I placed the entire floor under a strict impenetrable lockdown. No one was allowed up without my explicit biometric authorization. I spent every single day sitting beside her bed, managing the $40 million empire from my laptop while ensuring she was surrounded by absolute peace. But peace is a concept my biological family has never understood. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The sky over Buckhead was painted a bruised, heavy gray. I was sitting in the quiet luxury suite reviewing a quarterly financial report when my smartphone buzzed. It was an alert from the head of my private security detail stationed at the lobby elevator banks. I tapped the notification, bringing up the live security feed on my tablet. There they were, Julian, Valerie, and Simone. They looked completely unrecognizable from the arrogant socialites they had been half a year ago. Julian wore a cheap, ill-fitting jacket, his face gaunt and unshaven. Valerie had lost all her expensive jewelry, her hair unstyled and chaotic. Simone looked ragged, stripped of her designer labels and the false confidence her stolen wealth had provided. DeAndre was currently sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting his transfer to a penitentiary, which left Simone to face her ruin entirely alone. They had somehow discovered that Vivian was entering her final hours. Driven by a sickening mixture of panic and pure unadulterated greed, they had come to the hospital for one last desperate play. They wanted to force their way into her hospital room, drop to their knees, and beg a dying woman to amend her final will and testament. They wanted a deathbed pardon. I watched the screen as they marched toward the VIP elevators. "I am her son," Julian yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the guards. "You have no legal right to keep me from my mother. Please, you have to let us up," Valerie sobbed, reaching for the head of security. "Simone is here. We just want to make peace before she passes away. You cannot be this cruel." Simone looked up at the security cameras, knowing I was watching. "Let us up, Naomi," she shouted. "You took my house. You took my husband. Just let us see our grandmother." The head of security did not flinch. "My orders come directly from the legal proxy of the estate," he stated. "You are not on the approved visitor list. Vacate the premises immediately, or I will have you removed for trespassing." Julian lunged forward, trying to shove his way past the wall of muscle. Two guards instantly grabbed him, spinning him around and pinning his arms behind his back. Valerie screamed, but a third guard stepped in her path, creating an impenetrable barricade. "Get your hands off him!" Valerie shrieked wildly. "We are her family. We have rights. We are entitled to see her." "You have no rights here," the security chief replied firmly. "You are leaving right now." I watched the screen with absolute icy detachment as the security team physically marched my parents and my sister out of the hospital lobby. They dragged Julian through the automatic sliding doors, pushing him out into the freezing rain. Valerie and Simone followed, stumbling over their own feet, weeping bitterly as the reality of their total exclusion crashed down upon them. They were completely shut out. They would never get their deathbed pardon. They would never get a single dime. They were erased from Vivian's legacy forever. I stood up and walked over to Vivian's bedside. She looked incredibly frail, her dark skin contrasting with the pristine white hospital sheets. The monitors hummed a steady, slow rhythm, tracking her fading heartbeat. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes, when she slowly opened them and looked at me, were still sharp and completely lucid. She had heard the commotion on the security radio. She knew exactly what had just happened downstairs. "Are they gone?" Vivian asked, her voice a thin, fragile whisper that barely carried over the sound of the oxygen machine. "They are gone," I replied softly, pulling a chair closer to her bed and taking her cool, delicate hand in mine. "They will not be coming back. The security team removed them from the property. You do not have to worry about them ever again." A faint, satisfied smile touched the corners of her lips. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength given her condition. "Good," she murmured. "They thought they could wait until my last breath to steal what they could not earn. They thought death would make me soft. They were wrong." I felt a hard lump form in my throat. Despite all the ruthless legal strategies I had executed over the past 6 months, I was sitting beside the only person who had ever truly loved me. The armor I built to survive my parents was completely useless here in this quiet room. The impending loss was a heavy, crushing weight. "I do not want you to go," I whispered, my voice cracking slightly, betraying the immense sorrow I was trying to hide. "You are the only family that I have left." Vivian turned her head slightly, resting her tired eyes on my face. She reached up with her free hand, brushing a stray tear from my cheek. Her touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the fierce titan she had been her entire life. "You already know how to do this, Naomi," she said, her voice steady with absolute conviction. "You debugged the system. You purged the viruses. You took an empire of greed and scrubbed it clean. You do not need me to hold your hand anymore. You are the architect now." She took a slow, labored breath, the machines around us beeping in response to the strain. Her gaze deepened, locking onto my eyes with a profound, piercing clarity. She was preparing to pass the final torch, to transfer the very essence of her strength directly into my soul. "Listen to me very carefully," she commanded, her voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. "You have spent your entire life starving for the approval of people who are completely empty inside. You let them make you feel invisible because you thought blood meant loyalty. It does not." I leaned in closer, gripping her hand tightly, hanging onto every single word. "Family isn't blood," Naomi Vivian said, her eyes burning with a fierce, brilliant light. "Family is respect. Family is the people who stand by you when the world tries to break your spine." Julian, Valerie, Simone. They were never your family. They were just parasites wearing the masks of relatives. You've carried the weight of their sins long enough. Live for yourself now. A single tear slipped down my grandmother's cheek, tracking a slow path across her weathered skin. She squeezed my hand one final time, her grip conveying decades of love, pride, and absolute unyielding power. She closed her eyes as a deep, peaceful sigh escaped her lips. The rhythmic hum of the heart monitor slowly flatlined. The sudden continuous tone pierced the quiet room, signaling the end of an era. The nurses rushed into the suite, but I did not move. I did not let go of her hand. I just sat there, tears flowing silently down my face, mourning a legend. Grandmother Vivian Sterling was gone. She passed away peacefully on her own terms, insulated from the greedy scavengers who had tried to pick her bones clean. She died knowing her legacy was secured in the hands of the only person strong enough to protect it. I gently placed her hand back onto the white sheets and stood up, wiping the tears from my face. The sorrow was immense, but it was a clean, pure grief untainted by manipulation. I walked out of the hospital room and into the corridor. The security guards stood at attention, acknowledging the shift in power. I was no longer the proxy. I was the absolute proprietor of a $40 million dynasty. The past was dead and the future was mine to command. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. 8 months after grandmother Vivian passed away, the federal trial of DeAndre Washington reached its highly anticipated conclusion. I sat in the polished oak gallery of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building, wearing a sharp-tailored gray suit, watching the final moments of a man who truly believed he could steal my life without consequence. The courtroom was heavily air-conditioned and smelled of lemon polish and old paper. DeAndre looked absolutely terrible. The slick finance manager, who used to strut around in custom-tailored Italian suits and flash expensive watches, now wore a baggy, heavily wrinkled orange jumpsuit. His arrogant charm was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, sunken eyes and trembling hands of a cornered criminal. Attorney Sterling sat beside me, taking meticulous notes on a legal pad as the federal prosecutors delivered their blistering closing arguments. They laid out the exact digital footprint of the title washing scheme, connecting the forged biometric data directly to his underground gambling debt. The prosecution painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a desperate man leveraging stolen assets to save his own skin. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When the foreperson stood and read the verdict, the word guilty echoed through the quiet courtroom like a series of heavy hammer strikes. Guilty of wire fraud, guilty of identity theft, guilty of racketeering, guilty of grand larceny. The federal judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, did not hold back during the sentencing phase. He looked down from the bench at DeAndre and delivered a crushing, irreversible blow. 7 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. He berated DeAndre for abusing his corporate credentials and attempting to destroy his own family for greed. DeAndre physically collapsed into his chair, weeping openly as the armed bailiffs approached to shackle his wrists and ankles. The heavy chains clinked loudly in the silent room. There was no Simone sitting in the gallery behind him to offer tearful support. There were no wealthy Buckhead friends waiting to post a massive bail. He was dragged out of the courtroom utterly alone, facing nearly a decade behind bars, where his slick dealership charm would be completely useless. The first domino had officially fallen, and it fell hard. The second and third dominoes fell in rapid, devastating succession. Julian and Valerie had managed to avoid federal prison by a razor-thin margin, trading their complete cooperation for immunity, but their ultimate punishment was arguably much worse than a jail cell. To satisfy the massive restitution order mandated by the court and to repay the $500,000 they had embezzled from Vivian's trust, they were forced into total catastrophic bankruptcy. Attorney Sterling and I showed absolutely no mercy during the asset liquidation process. We executed the court orders with brutal military precision. We seized everything they had ever valued. The luxury vehicles were repossessed by the banks in the middle of the night. The designers of watches and the imported art pieces were aggressively auctioned off to the highest bidder. Their remaining bank accounts were completely drained, leaving them with a balance of absolutely zero. Stripped of their stolen wealth and their precious buckhead socialite status, they were violently ejected from the elite circles they had spent decades trying to infiltrate. The very people who used to drink their expensive vintage champagne and attend their lavish dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with them. Their names became synonymous with fraud and toxic greed in the Atlanta high society gossip circles. With zero financial assets and absolutely no credit score, they had no choice but to move into a cramped, rundown apartment complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. The contrast to their former life was exceptionally brutal. The sweeping marble staircases and crystal chandeliers they once paraded under were replaced by peeling linoleum floors, flickering fluorescent hallway lights, and the constant roar of highway traffic outside their single thin window. They were trapped in a miserable reality of their own creation. But the ultimate humiliation came when reality forced them to seek employment. They were in their late 50s with no modern technological skills and a massive public fraud scandal firmly attached to their names through countless internet search results. No respectable corporate firm would even look at their resumes. My father, Julian, the man who used to boast loudly about his visionary real estate investments and his superior business acumen, was forced to take a job as a greeter at a massive big box discount store. He spent 8 hours a day, standing on hard, unforgiving concrete floors wearing a cheap blue polyester vest. I was forced to smile and wave at the very same working-class people he used to openly despise and mock. The heavy toll of physical labor quickly broke his arrogant posture, leaving him with chronic back pain and a permanent scowl of defeat. My mother Valerie suffered an equally devastating fate. The woman who built her entire fragile identity around high-end fashion brands and exclusive country club gossip was hired as a junior sales associate at a mid-tier discount department store. She spent her long, grueling shifts folding discounted sweaters, dealing with angry customers, and organizing messy clearance racks. Her perfectly manicured hands were now rough and calloused from hauling heavy cardboard inventory boxes in the stockroom. I received a discreet report from the private investigator showing a photograph of Valerie on her 30-minute lunch break. She was sitting completely alone on a cracked concrete bench behind the shopping mall, eating a cheap packaged sandwich and looking utterly defeated by the world. The heavy burden of actual hard work and the total loss of her vanity had aged her 10 years in a matter of months. Their kingdom of lies had completely collapsed, leaving them buried underneath the heavy rubble of their own making. Then there was Simone, the ultimate golden child, the fake real estate mogul who had built an entire personality out of unearned privilege and overwhelming narcissism. Her downfall was the most spectacular and poetic of all. The moment DeAndre was indicted, Simone's carefully constructed world entirely imploded. The fake pregnancy she had used to manipulate sympathy was instantly exposed when the medical records from the court proceedings became public knowledge. The sheer embarrassment of faking an unborn child for financial gain made her a total pariah in her social circles. Her so-called friends blocked her on every social media platform, refusing to be associated with such toxic behavior. Her luxury real estate brokerage fired her immediately, citing a severe breach of morality and ethics clauses in her contract. Without DeAndre's illegal income, and without the endless stream of stolen cash from my parents, Simone was left completely exposed to the harsh elements of reality. She had hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt spanning multiple high-interest accounts that she used to fund her designer wardrobe and lavish spa days. The creditors swarmed her like starving vultures sensing a wounded animal. Lawsuits rained down on her weekly, resulting in massive wage garnishments and the aggressive seizure of her remaining personal property. Stripped of her criminal husband, her fake baby, her limitless credit cards, and her stolen McMansion, Simone experienced a terrifying freefall into absolute crushing poverty. She had no college degree. She had no actual work ethic to fall back on. The facade of black excellence she so proudly projected was entirely shattered, leaving behind a bitter, unskilled woman with zero prospects and a mountain of legal debt. 6 months after the federal trial concluded, I had a highly profitable business meeting across town. I decided to stop for a quick iced coffee before heading back to my corporate office. I pulled my pristine Audi e-tron, the exact same vehicle she had illegally tried to steal, into the drive-through lane of a popular fast food chain. I rolled down my tinted window and handed my premium black credit card to the worker at the cash register. When the worker handed the card back along with my drink, I looked up. It was Simone. She was wearing a grease-stained polyester uniform and a cheap plastic visor. Her hair, which used to be perfectly styled by expensive salons, was pulled back into a messy, unwashed bun. The heavy, unmistakable smell of frying oil and cheap cleaning chemicals clung to her clothes. She looked incredibly exhausted, her face completely drained of that arrogant smugness she used to wear like a royal crown. Her hands were raw and blistered from scrubbing commercial grills and handing out cheap paper bags. When she looked up and saw me sitting behind the wheel of the exact luxury car she had tried to wash the title for, her eyes went wide with pure agonizing shock. She completely froze, her hand trembling violently as she held out my paper receipt. We stared at each other for a long, silent moment, while the engine of the Audi purred softly. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I did not hurl insults or say a single word to her. I simply took my receipt, rolled up my tinted window, and drove away smoothly, leaving her standing in the suffocating heat of the drive-through window, smelling like cheap grease and profound monumental regret. She had finally learned her place in the real world, and it was exactly where she belonged. A full year passed since that brief, silent encounter at the drive-through window. The seasons changed, washing away the final lingering shadows of the Washington family and their pathetic attempts to destroy my existence. The dust had settled completely. The debris of their shattered lives had been swept away, leaving me standing on a pristine foundation of my own design. I had successfully managed Grandmother Vivian's $40 million estate, expanding its reach and diversifying the corporate portfolio with the same ruthless precision she had taught me. I did not just maintain her massive empire. I multiplied it, building entirely new wealth upon the solid bedrock of absolute integrity and strategic foresight. It was a bright, crisp Tuesday morning in downtown Atlanta. The sky was a brilliant, unobstructed blue, reflecting vividly off the towering glass facades of the city skyscrapers. I sat behind the leather wheel of my Audi e-tron, the exact same $90,000 vehicle that had ignited the initial fuse of my family's total annihilation. The sleek interior was smooth and familiar. The engine hummed with quiet electric power. It was no longer just a luxury car. It was a tangible trophy of my survival and a constant reminder of my victory over their deceit. I steered the silent vehicle off the bustling main avenue and pulled smoothly into the private reserved parking space of a massive, newly renovated commercial building. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the warm, southern air, smoothing the front of my tailored emerald green power suit. I looked up at the towering structure rising powerfully before me. The building was a sleek, striking combination of restored red brick and modern reinforced glass, representing a perfect bridge between historical resilience and futuristic innovation. Across the wide main entrance, a polished steel sign gleamed brightly in the morning sunlight. It read, "The Vivian Sterling Academy of Technology and Innovation." I walked proudly through the automatic glass doors and stepped into the expansive sunlit atrium. The sound of eager voices and the rapid rhythmic clicking of hundreds of mechanical keyboards filled the air. This was the ultimate realization of my grandmother's immense fortune and my own technical expertise combined into one unstoppable force. I had allocated a highly significant portion of Vivian's estate to completely purchase and gut this sprawling commercial property, transforming it into a state-of-the-art tech and coding academy. But this was not just any standard educational institution. I had designed this modern academy with a highly specific and intensely personal mission. The Vivian Sterling Academy was built strictly for marginalized, highly gifted Black girls who had survived severe psychological, domestic, or financial abuse. I knew exactly what it felt like to be a brilliant young mind trapped in a toxic environment where your maximum potential was constantly smothered by the very people who were legally supposed to nurture it. I knew the suffocating desperation of having your hard work stolen and your confidence deliberately eroded by narcissistic abusers who demanded your silent subservience. I built this advanced fortress, so that other young women would never have to endure that soul-crushing isolation without a powerful, reliable lifeline. I walked slowly down the pristine hallways, observing the advanced computer labs through the floor-to-ceiling glass partitions. Inside, dozens of brilliant young girls were learning advanced Python programming, cybersecurity protocols, and complex user interface design. They were working on high-end dual-monitor setups, utilizing the exact same cutting-edge technology used by top-tier corporate consulting firms. They were not just learning how to code software, they were learning how to build their own impenetrable financial armor. They were learning how to become absolute architects of their own undeniable success, entirely free from the manipulation of toxic guardians. My faculty consisted of industry-leading tech professionals and highly specialized trauma counselors, ensuring these young women received both the critical technical skills to dominate the corporate world and the psychological support to completely heal from their pasts. We provided them with full academic scholarships, generous housing stipends, and guaranteed lucrative job placement programs. I was taking the immense wealth my parents had selfishly tried to steal for their shallow vanity and actively using it to forge an entire generation of untouchable independent tech leaders. I was weaponizing my success to lift up those who had been violently pushed down, creating a lasting legacy of genuine Black excellence based entirely on intellectual merit and resilience, rather than designer labels and stolen funds. I reached the executive suite at the very end of the hall and stepped confidently into my corner office. A large, beautiful portrait of Grandmother Vivian hung proudly behind my massive oak desk, her sharp, wise eyes watching over the powerful empire we had secured together. I poured myself a warm cup of black coffee and walked over to the expansive window, looking out over the vibrant, sprawling city of Atlanta. The long journey had been incredibly brutal and exhausting. It had required me to permanently sever the deepest biological ties and face down the absolute ugliest aspects of human greed. But standing here looking at the magnificent intellectual sanctuary I had built from the ashes of their betrayal, I felt a profound, absolute peace. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the reality of my absolute victory settle firmly into my bones. I realized that the greatest threat to your future is often disguised as the people you share a past with. Sometimes finding your true worth requires burning the bridge that connects you to the people trying to drag you underwater. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and you certainly cannot fly while carrying the dead weight of toxic relatives. I had struck the match. I had watched the bridge burn entirely to ash. And from that ash, I had built an empire that no one could ever steal again. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of surviving the unimaginable.